Hello, welcome to another voiceover portrait demo. Here is the portrait that I'm going to be using. I'm using it as a little more of a loose reference for this painting. I'm doing it all in acrylic. So I have my acrylic paints here. I will list down all the colors below. This is kind of my usual palette, plus I think cerulean blue. I had that on there for another project, but I think I used it a few times. This is a primed piece of canvas paper. I just used a thin wash of a bright pink all over it, and I've taped it to another wood panel. So I'm wanting to show this step, which is different from the other demo I did, because I did that one in oils and I did a lot of pre-mixing. So I just wanted to quickly show, like, this is me mixing that average shadow color. I'm not doing pre-mixing because with acrylic in my studio it's just really hot. It dries out way too fast. So I mix as I go, but you know, if you have watched my other videos, that should look very familiar, because that's exactly what I do in all the other courses. I think I did a little bit of oil in the Frida. I did a quick oil demo in the portrait one, but everything else is acrylic. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I was doing a loose drawing, so I wanted to sort of show you guys an example, sort of an Alice Neal-esque example of not exactly sticking to the exact ratios and proportions. So I'm going to include the reference photo I used for you guys, so you'll be able to see, you know, with your own eyes. But I really wanted to make her neck longer than it was in real life, because it is this, like, when you look at the photo, for me, like, she's strikingly beautiful, but her neck feels very long, and I wanted to sort of play that up. I also shrunk her forehead a little bit to sort of play up features. It's not as, like, overt of a choice as it seems. It's more, I'm just sort of doing a drawing, and it ends up a little bit in that Alice Neal cartoon land a little bit. And I'm just showing you guys, you know, what it looks like to lean into it. And kind of on that note, one thing that I have looked into and studied that I think can help, or at least inform, your portrait practice is looking into caricature drawings. So like it can be anywhere from, like, when you go to like a boardwalk or a theme park, they have people who will sit and sort of draw you and maybe like your partner or you and your best friend, and they'll like really exaggerate your features. And I think that that can be a really helpful way to sort of key in what makes someone look like themselves. When you have those portrait painters, a lot of times they're going for likeness over accuracy. And so if you're more interested in likeness over accuracy, that's a great place to study. So I did that quite a bit over the last year or two, and that's been really fun. There's even online courses that specialize in that, if you really want to go in deep. But this will seem familiar if you watched last week's video, and this is just me going in with the average shadow color. I think it always looks super dark initially, especially if your canvas is primed a really light color. And I do think I made this maybe half value step too dark, but it was easy to bring it all up. But yeah, there's a really pretty distinct shadow on her face. So unlike last week where it was kind of a more ambient soft light, this week it's easier to really see that shadow work. And again, if you're starting with the average shadow approach, having a more distinct light will be more helpful. And similar to last week, I'm blocking in her hair, which is a full step darker in value, just to get the darks in first, and then I'll go in with the lights. Any strategy would work. If you wanted to go in and get your average lit, that would also be a totally fine strategy. It's just a matter of helping yourself make the best value decisions as fast as possible. I mean, I guess I'll rephrase that. Not as quickly as possible, but not really being precious until you allow yourself to find most of those values. I think that's a better way of phrasing it. But yeah, so I'm blocking all that in. I do have this sped up a little bit. I think I have most of this at either a 2x speed, or I think some of the more daunting parts are at a 3-part speed. I worried that last week's was way too long for people. I often get people request that I film them slower, and I think when you're doing in-person demos, that can be really fun, but it really is kind of like watching paint dry. I mean, almost literally, whenever you see something in real time. So I'm trying out just twice sped up. I think it's a better balance. But here I'm finding some of those lit values. So again, dividing our face into lit and not lit. I am looking for the darker values on the lit part of the face. So that happens to be a lot of these halftones, like around the jaw or the bridge of the nose where it sort of fades into the shadow. And after the halftones, I'm going to go in with more of the lit parts of the face and really build up to those highlights. Another thing that I feel is pretty striking about this reference photo is because of that lovely direct light, her cheekbone and like around her eye socket area has a really nice highlight to it. And so I'm wanting to be very cognizant about building up to that to be able to paint that. I hope you guys are enjoying the course so far. Really excited about it. And, you know, when we were going over and proofing everything, I hope you really liked the beginning part, because what I love about portraiture is I feel like, I don't know, it's like portraits are a really good way to sort of see a really intimate side of a relationship, even if it's like with a stranger you're painting, just like someone you know or someone you don't know very well. It doesn't really matter, because like the act of observing and taking in like another human is a very like vulnerable and like hard to fake sort of interaction, you know? And so I want to be really careful, because sometimes I see people approach portrait in a really classical academic way, and it becomes very prescriptive. And I think it's an easy way to kind of suck the beauty and the excitement and the interest and the quirkiness out of that relationship that can happen when you make it about perfectly capturing and perfectly rendering and, you know, lifelike quality over anything else. I think, you know, it really takes some of the life out. And I really appreciate portraits that maybe aren't super perfectly rendered. And I feel like I want to give you a path to be able to do a really academic portrait if you so desire. But I also want you to not get discouraged, especially because like if you're newer to portrait, even if you're very good and you progress very quickly and you work really hard and do lots of academic studies and life drawings and all that good stuff, you will probably pass through a time where things are a little wonky, and I don't want that to be a terrible experience. And if you're holding yourself to a really high standard, it might be. You know, I have had portraits, you know, and some of them are just objectively terrible, but I've had portraits that I initially didn't love because they were not perfectly accurate, but, you know, they're of my children or friends or family. And I look back at them now, and, you know, I captured likeness, I captured a unique color story, and sort of as I get some distance from those paintings, I start to really enjoy them. And I think I wish someone would have told me that, just to make space for those imperfections and not worry about it being super accurate. But when you're, you know, when you're learning and you're a student, it's hard to not want to do that. So anyways, but I made a real point to highlight the other artists who are more or less interested in perfect accuracy and still do a really good job. So I guess I'm just hoping that was a really helpful section for you guys. So now I'm blocking in the background. Usually it's about at this point where I feel like my eyes are kind of calibrating to what I'm looking at. I'm starting to understand the value a little bit. It's starting to look like a person, and it's a really encouraging point to be at. This is kind of where I start to consider the painting really starts. Okay, now that literally the whole canvas is covered, I can sort of start to think about building the form and really constructing the painting, to kind of use my own way of thinking. You know, the underpainting, everything up until this point was just the framework, and now I feel like in a lot of ways I'm actually starting my painting. So I'm trying to be careful not to go too bright all at once, especially on that lovely highlight area. It's very tempting to do. And since I use sort of a couple different, like maybe 2 or 3 average lit colors, I did sort of the halftones and then maybe 1 or 2 more lit planes of the face. Now I'm sort of bringing them up and pushing them down and sort of going in on either side of that value and warming and cooling depending on, you know, what the light is doing with the face. And it's a step-by-step thing. This is acrylic, so you can't blend as much. You really have to lay down more solid thoughts, unlike oil, which can be a tough thing to go back and forth from. But one thing I try to remember when I'm doing acrylic is, there's a certain amount of muddling you can do, where I always consider it, like, especially, I think we call it modeling, is like the official term for it, but it's a word that I think it has its roots in like clay or 3D sculpture, where you're sort of building up the form by making little marks and little imprints, and you can do something really similar with the two-dimensional material with a paint, and it's just sort of pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling. And because you can't really blend, because blending is not really in your arsenal when you're working acrylic, I mean, you can a little. In my studio, I think the AC's off. It's like 102 today, so it's pretty toasty in here when the acrylic dries like instantly. You can push and pull a little, but not much. You're sort of just, you're putting down a couple marks, and if they're not accurate, that's fine. You can go back and pull it up and push it down, and it's a lot of back and forth, where I feel like in oil you can sort of make a statement and then sort of blend the edges if you need to. You don't have access to that, so it's a lot of blending and putting down and blending and putting down and warming and cooling. And in this particular portrait, there's not a lot of cool. There's a bit of cool reflected light on the shadow side of the face, but her highlight is pretty warm. I would assume her light source is a warm light source, which actually kind of makes it easier because I'm really able to just pull warm and lighter for the most part. I'm using a lot of yellow ochres, a bit of pyrrole orange, a little bit of cadmium red, and obviously a lot of the complements. I'm mixing those. I think some people also get overwhelmed when you don't start off with skin tones, and on my acrylic palette I don't have any browns. But just remember, like, there's a lot of Jenkins green or sap green with those oranges and reds. I usually start with that, and that's a really quick way to get some nice skin tones. But you'll come up with shortcuts on your own palette, and you'll just sort of, every time you mix something, you'll sort of know to start with those. But another note, something you can do with acrylic also is, let's say, this is, for me, is just like a 1-hour little demo I'm doing. It's pretty informal, but let's say I'm doing a more formal portrait and I'm going for a little more accuracy, especially in the skin. You can always take little either baby food containers, or sometimes those little ketchup containers you get from fast food stores. Maybe you get them without ketchup in it. And you can sort of pre-mix maybe some flesh tones for yourself. So if I was doing this painting, I would maybe do the underpainting just how I did, and then realize, because by that point I've got some color recipes. Like, I've got like a yellow ochre, dioxazine violet, Jenkins green mixture I keep using for her skin tone. So maybe I mix that up and I put that in a container, and then I don't have to mix that so many times while I'm working on this portrait, because it's pre-mixed, and if you mix a lot of it, it can stay wet for a long time, and I can just put it, inside my Stay Wet palette. And that might be a helpful thing to sort of have. If you're working with acrylics and you keep finding yourself mixing the same 2 or 3 colors and then sort of slightly adjusting that's definitely a technique that you can use. And as I'm working on the lips, one little tip I don't know if I mentioned this in the course or not, it's easy to want to go way too red with the lips, because in contrast to the rest of the face, they're pretty warm or pigmented. But I think a lot of that has to do with, again, we're so tuned into the face, we're so keyed in to the subtleties of the face. The slight millimeter raise of an eyebrow can like change someone's entire demeanor. If the stem of an apple moved slightly to the right a millimeter, like, we'd never notice. So I have to remember and recognize and make sure to constantly sort of be aware of the fact that the subtleties in the face are always going to be exaggerated for how we perceive them. So, you know, with lips, that's the one way, you know, we tend to make them really red, and they don't always need to be. You know, this lovely person is not wearing lipstick. I think or if she is, it's a natural color. And I think I went in pretty dark red first, so I had to bring that back out. Another thing is not going in super dark with the eyebrows. And also making sure you don't paint the eyebrows just the color of the hairs. So sometimes people want to match the eyebrows to the hair, and sometimes that works. But a lot of times your eyebrows, especially your back third of your eyebrow, you can see your skin underneath it, and sort of what you're looking at is like a mix of your skin and your eyebrow hair. And so our eyebrows can be more green or ashy compared to like the actual pigment of our hair. And so we just have to remember to not overpaint them too dark, even though they are very contrasty and they may call a lot of attention to themselves. Like, just being aware that you don't want to overpaint the eyes. And, you know, eyebrows, remember, just like lips, like they form around a face. Like the front of your face is kind of like a half cylinder. Like it really is. I mean, it's more spherical, but roughly, you know, think like one of those little Lego heads, the little yellow ones. You know, it's sort of this cylinder shape, and your eyebrows are flush against that. And so most of the time when we see eyebrows, it's going to be 3 colors. You know, the first third, the middle third, and the back third. That's kind of what I try to do, or try to at least see if I can find. It's not an every time situation, but when I'm drawing, painting in eyebrows, I make sure to try to break that down instead of just going in with one color and drawing in the eyebrow shape. And that goes for anywhere you see hair, and you have like your skin or the background kind of showing through where you see individual hairs. I rarely does a painting call for actually painting in individual hairs with a tiny brush. A lot of times you sort of have to split the average between the hair color and like the skin color. So if her skin is like a warm yellow and her hair is like a coolish dark brown, those two together are going to almost equal green. And so the places where the hair is covering the face and you can see through the hair, in order to sort of get that effect, you have to mix a little bit of that skin tone with the hair and then block it in as a solid form instead of drawing in the individual hairs. It's really important to treat hair as like a mass instead of individual strands. And it's tough. It's tough to not want to draw in the hairs. I get that. And I'm not always perfect at that. But just try to, you know, especially with the highlight, you know, I did like a lighter, more ashy, dark gray, and then one more little bit of the slightly lighter color, and by building that up you sort of get that dimensional hair look. So I'm also going back in and tightening up the background and using that to make my my final statements. I think I'm glazing a little bit, so that's a technique that you can use. I find it really helpful in portraits more so than just about anything else. Occasionally I'll use it in my still life, like my big final legit still lifes. I'll like sometimes use it to like, you know, hint at a shadow or warm something up or cool something down. But basically you just take a little bit of, either you can use something like glazing fluid or airbrush liquid. You can Google that and, you know, find it from, I think Golden and Liquitex has their own version. But you just thin it out to a very thin texture, and then you sort of just lightly scrub it over, and you can use that as like a way to glaze. I did it a little bit with the cheeks and a little bit with the lips, and that's pretty much it. I really wanted to have this like cartoonish, not quite perfectly real, but real-ish portrait, and it was really fun. Hopefully that was informative for you guys to watch. I wanted to show you guys a full acrylic demo, so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed watching that come together.